friends, it's Christine, and I hope wherever you are in the midst of this quarantine, you're doing well and experiencing the grace and goodness of God despite the challenges you're facing. Recently, my husband and I did a webinar for our church about marriage during quarantine, and I thought, why not share this with my podcast audience? So I have a bonus episode for you today. Kyle and I talked about both the challenges and the opportunities we all have in our relationships during this time. We covered topics such as communication, conflict, handling emotions and stress, making time for one another with kids underfoot all the time, and some best practices that we suggest that we can all incorporate to help our marriages thrive during this stressful time. We wanted to encourage the people in our church, but we also hope this encourages and helps you if you are married. So here, friends, is my conversation with my husband, Kyle, on marriage in quarantine.
No one's done this before, so this is new for all of us. And so marriage can be challenging in and of itself, but it's also challenging when things are kind of been flipped over on us. And so as a pastor, I've talked to several different folks and, dealing with challenges or issues or friction points, things like that. And, and so some marriages are doing great, and that's super, and they're kind of keeping on and progressing with things. But I think certainly there's some common friction points and issues that have kind of arisen that I've heard from as I've interacted with different folks.
And before you say that, I think it might be helpful just to say, what have we seen? Because as I said at the very beginning, we've seen some pain points as well. And I would say what we have found is that things that were they were just kind of a little bit under the surface, and we were just kind of trucking through life, the busyness of life, that we don't really have to deal with it. It wasn't anything super pressing, but in this time, those things have, I guess, become a little more pronounced, or there's not a lot to cover that over, if you know what I mean. So we've had, I would say it's an opportunity. We've taken that opportunity to deal with some things that we just needed to deal with and haven't in the busyness of life.
Yeah. I mean, usually it's like I'm out and about, all throughout the day, but here it's, I'm home a lot. So throughout the day, there'll be 1,000 opportunities, touch points together. And so just little things will flare up that we've had to talk through and deal with for sure. But I think this time is a marriage accelerator is one thing I've heard. That's definitely, I think it's taken some good things and made them really great and helps people celebrate in their marriage. And then I think certainly it's the little things that maybe a busy schedule or calendar is now with there's more time are getting exposed. But I think a few things in particular that I've heard from different folks is that area of like apathy or dullness, or just kind of like not interested in things, and just kind of like a mental
everything's the same.
Yes. And so there's almost a struggle of even communicating and knowing how to communicate with your spouse about something other than what coronavirus is all about, but almost just this like mental dullness with folks. And then I think another thing is distraction. So for me, I know that whatever I'm doing at that moment, I almost feel like I should be doing something else. So wherever I'm at, I ought to be doing something else. And so I feel like there's been a lot of distraction where it's like when we're together, I'm like, oh, I need to do this or that, or I'm struggling to be fully present always, because I'm like, I should be using my time in some different way. So that's a normal one. I know that, at home moms, or maybe even people who work at home, just that everyone being together now is creating a unique dynamic where there's almost like a spousal invasion that has happened, that what used to be your place and space, now you share that with someone else. And I know you felt that at times when it's like, with writing and things like that, it's like, man, we're all up in your business.
Well,
now.
I'm used to being at home by myself during the day. Now I have a kid, and each kid has a different room where they're doing school, and then Kyle's there, and then I'm trying to do things. So it just feels a little bit more chaotic. I know I'm not telling y'all anything you don't already know, but that's how we're experiencing it.
And then I think that the number one thing that people have shared with me is just this difficulty in extending grace, that I think all of us are feeling a little bit. We know that these are new and crazy times, and we're not, there aren't many people that are just abounding in awesomeness. They're not living their dream right now. And so it's just coming at us. And the overarching theme is, how do we extend grace to our spouse in the midst of just, we're all struggling, or a lot of us are. And so I think that's going to be the large umbrella. But I think that the last one I was going to share is that's been interesting for me, because it's maybe a little bit different than what I thought it might be, is in the category of sexual intimacy. Like, I think that I thought it's like, oh, we even talk about it like this in our staff meeting. Is this going to be like a baby boomlet? Are there 9 months from now going to be a lot of babies coming? But I think that a lot of people have really kind of struggled with sexual intimacy. Like, their libido is down, or they're not engaged with one another sexually. They don't have the desire, the interests, those kinds of things. And so those are some of the big pastoral things that people are talking to me about.
Okay, so I'm going to ask for people at home, what are you saying to those who are coming to you about sexual intimacy? What kind of counsel are you giving to those who are saying, are they saying it like it's a surprise? Or are they saying it as a frustration? What are you saying to people about that?
I think there's some level of lament that's happening. That I haven't talked to many. I mean, if they're doing really well in that area, they're probably not going to come and talk to me about that. But the ones that are struggling are like, man, it's hard. It's almost like for both of them a struggle, or if it can be with one of them. But I think certainly we'll talk about things that can kind of facilitate more intimacy. But I think sex is always it's a creator of intimacy, and it's the result of intimacy. And so I think it can be used to stir up intimacy, but I think also, are you doing things ahead of time that are intentional? Yeah. That then one thing doesn't just lead to another. Like, intentional things lead to one another, where then you're.
Yeah. So we'll talk some more about that later on, I'm sure. But I think it's just good to normalize that. We wanted to tell you those things because we want to normalize this experience that people are feeling and experiencing this in a very unique way. And there are some unique challenges to this, but there's also some unique opportunities. And that's what we want to look at is, okay, so we're presented with these challenges, but how can we address these in a way to where we've got this time? How can we grow in our relationship?
Because I think that's a key idea, is that this is an opportunity that, like, God has placed you in this situation in your marriage to walk through something that is unprecedented, and it's an opportunity to grow. And I think that's kind of the things that we've seen as well. Like, in the midst of the difficulties, we've also been able to identify, like, hey, this is a better understanding of who we are and how we relate to each other. And so I think
and I would say, are you about to segue? I would say that one thing that's been very clear to me, sometimes I don't know if you feel this way in life, where life is just so crazy and busy that I'm like, what am I supposed to be doing? What am I supposed to be giving my time to? And this has been a really good, like, it is simple. It is simplified. It's not easy simple, but it's simplified, where it's so clear to me when God says to love your neighbor as yourself, who my neighbor is. My neighbor is my husband. My neighbor are my children. Those are the people that I am around and seeing. And so what God is asking me to do each day is to love my neighbor. And what we're going to talk about is just falls under that category of loving your neighbor as yourself.
These are the neighbors that aren't going to panic if you ring their doorbell, or you don't have to quarantine from. Like, these are your closest circle of neighbors. And so so I think viewing this as opportunity seeing as an opportunity for growth and to develop more intimacy as you go, not just sexually, but in every different way as you go. Now, why don't we just dive into some topics and discussion? And so one of those is, obviously, communication is a big deal right now. And so as we think about communicating, like, what are some recommendations you would give of, like, how can we communicate most effectively with our spouse during this time?
Well, I would say that communication is always vital to a marriage, but I think we're finding, and we would encourage you to think about that communication, almost over communication, is essential during this time. And what I mean by that is, in normal life, you kind of have a rhythm down, right? Like, work schedules, kids schedules, all that kind of thing. You know what you do on your day off, and you don't really have to talk about it. But in this time, everything is just so new. It's almost like starting over. We've said that even with the church, it feels almost like church planting again. So you're having to set some new rhythms. And so what that means is you need to over communicate. And what I mean by over communicate is, this is almost a daily discussion now for us at night to say, okay, tell me what you have tomorrow. What do you need? What will help you help the children? How can I help you make sure that you're getting your work done, because we're all in the same place. And so just over communicating what our needs are, how we're feeling that day, because I'm sure as you're experiencing, each day is different. Sometimes I feel really down for no reason, and sometimes he does. And so just talking about, okay, how are you feeling today? And then knowing tomorrow it's going to be different. And so we need to be over communicating about schedule, about emotions and needs, and being able to say, sometimes it's hard for me to say directly, this is what I need. But I'm learning in this time that I, as an introvert in a house full of boys, that I sometimes just need to go up to my room for an hour. And so to our room. And so for me to say to him, I need that, and that's okay. Like, I don't have to feel guilty about that. It has been really helpful. But I think also over communicating encouragement. So thinking about, I would say, I've thought about this so much. I would say every single person needs encouragement right now. Like, we always need encouragement, but I keep, like I said to him this morning, I just don't know if I'm doing this right. Like, not that there's a right, but it just feels so disorienting that I need truth from him, and I need encouragement to say, okay, he says you're on the right track as a mom. Like, here's some specific things that you've done that I've been thankful for, that you've done with our kids or whatever. Just specific encouragement that you can give your spouse about how they are handling this, how they are making their transition in work, how they're making this, like, everybody's in transition. And when I say encouragement, I want you to get as specific as you can. So specific encouragement about something you saw them do or that they have done for you. I think that we want to think about building a culture in our homes right now of grace and of encouragement and over communicating, just to make sure that we're helping and serving one another in ways that are helpful to our spouse.
And I think and you've done a really good job of like letter writing or letting people know different things and necessary that have been very life-giving for when I got a letter today.
For me. So yeah, I've been reading Philippians, and I was like, Paul was writing from prison in his confinement. So I thought, I'm just going to write to the saints. And honestly, it's been good for me to do that and to think of people, to pray for people, and to write people. So I'm like, I actually thought today, I need to do this for my kids. Like, I want to do this for my husband, and not just be thinking out, but thinking internally as well.
Mm-hmm. It can be challenging in communication, but I would encourage you to think through how to intentionally communicate about things that maybe you wouldn't communicate normally, because you've got time. There's no sports on. There aren't, we're not going to track meets or all these kinds of things. So how can you use an increased amount of time to not talk about COVID, but to talk about matters of who you are, how you can grow, the Lord's work in your life, who you want to be as a couple. Like, these are the opportunities to really develop some deeper level conversation that could be really great.
Yeah. So with communication, and as Kyle said, you're in close proximity, there's a lot of points coming together, which means there's increased conflict. And so I just want to ask you about that for conflict resolution. What are some thoughts that you would have, especially as we're living on top of one another? What are some things that we need to think about with conflict? But what would you say then? Well, I mean, we need to think about it too.
Yeah, for sure. I think the ability to put things in the right perspective and order. Like some things are small and they need to you need to give grace and move on and be like, these are hard times. And so how do we move past that?
Yeah.
And then I think some other things are if you can address the issue at hand and not the person, I think that always goes a long way. Like, my feelings were hurt when this happened, because I think that what that does, at least for some people, is it helps them to feel like they're not being attacked personally, but that there's something, either like for guys who like to solve things, it's like, okay, well, I can help solve, we can solve that problem. But I think it's easy for things to become very personal because there's, like I said, the 1,000 little contact points where it's going to happen.
So what would be an example of a small thing that we would need to overlook? What are some?
What do you think?
Well, I was thinking today, I said to him, in our kitchen where the bar, like the kids are just collecting things on the kitchen counter, it's like Luke's Lego creation is taking over, and there's just all this junk that just keeps piling up. And normally in our daily rhythms, those things are moving along. Like the kids' stuff is where they need to be. Their school stuff is not everywhere. And so that's really been bothering me. And I will sometimes ask them to move things so it doesn't just overtake the kitchen. But I have had to say to myself, like, I like a clean, orderly space, and that's just not going to happen right now. And that's okay. At one point, I will have it back the way that I would like it to be. And so I said to you this morning, this is kind of driving me crazy, but I'm not going to make that a battle to fight with him, or it's not really even him, it's more the kids. But I'm just thinking of things like that, where it's like, normally things would be this way and I prefer it this way, but it's really not something that needs to rise to the top of conversation right now.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's great. I think and I think that you do a good job of keeping short accounts. Like, so there's not big stockpiling wrongs and then it's just, but it's specific, like, hey, that's frustrating to me over there. Can you be intentional? And so it's like, try to get the boys snap to it or do those kinds of things. I'm always amazed when is the lack of skill that some people have as far as crafting a well-phrased apology or confession. Like, we're told to confess our sins one to another, but a lot of us, we're like, what does that look like practically? And so I've walked through this with many couples of how to confess something well, ask for forgiveness, seek restoration. And so it really it can be, if you have no experience with it, it can be this very rote process that I was wrong when, and then you kind of say,
I'm going to write this down for everybody.
Okay. She's taking notes.
I
was wrong when, and then you kind of fill in the blank about what you did that you recognize that was sinful, wrong, hurtful. And then it just kind of comes out where you're like, it must have made you feel, and then you write 3 descriptors, 3 adjectives, or what, it must have made you feel neglected, misunderstood, or whatever that might be. And then the simple question is, will you forgive me? And so it's important. I just think it's a lot of times we don't know how to ask for forgiveness, receive forgiveness, offer it, because we don't even get to that clear point. And so we have to be able to identify how we've sinned against someone, and for it to be said, and it to be said in a way that it's understood, that
the other person knows
that you get it.
That you get how they feel.
Yeah. Because I know that when we've done it, they're like, hey, I was wrong.
And I'm like, no.
Like, I've got a few more words to add to your little list.
Yeah.
And then the options are always the biblical options. It's yes, I forgive you. And you only forgive when you truly are ready to forgive, or not yet. Like, those are the only 2 biblical options, because we know that as Christ forgave, he's like, how many times do we forgive? 7 times 7? No, 70 times 7. That's not 490 times. That's just a picture of, like, an incredible amount of forgiveness, if nothing else, because we don't want to become the people that are embittered and hold on to wrongs, but for our own souls and for the restoration of others. People who know the grace of God have to learn to grow in forgiveness.
So what do you mean by not yet? Like, what is that response?
That means I know I have to work towards forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
But right now I've gotta process it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But then you always circle back.
But like, we're coming back to this conversation.
Yes. That means it is an open conversation, always, for sure. So those are some things for conflict resolution. I know that for emotions are a big part of things as well. Like I know I've felt like mine are all over the map, and
I'm sure y'all are feeling that as well.
Yeah.
That's how,
So they probably spike and are unpredictable. Like for me, every day is the same, but my emotions are very different every day.
Yeah.
So do you have any kind of practical advice for how to help manage emotions during this season?
I just think it's really helpful for me, and I see this with other people as well, to be able to name how we feel, to actually think about what is really bothering me. I think even today I forgot what we were talking about, and I was kind of like, oh, we were talking about something related to the church, and I kind of I felt like I started moving toward telling you what to do, or it might have come across as like, I don't think you're doing a good job, which is not true, people. I think he's doing a good job.
That was fun.
But I think I stopped myself and I said, wait, no, what really I feel is, I can't even remember what I said, but I remember stopping and going, no, I'm not feeling frustrated with you. I do think you're doing a good job. I'm feeling, and I think it was like fear or something like that. It was like, I don't feel fear about the church, but I wish I could remember what I was talking about. See, it wasn't even a big deal, but to say, wait, what's really underneath is this feeling. And I was almost like looking to him to rescue the situation or to make it better by what I was saying, but really just to be vulnerable and say, no, really, I just feel this. And I know there's nothing that you can do about that. And there's nothing I can do about it, but this is what it is. And I think to name how we're feeling, that's why I think part of communication every day needs to be, how are you feeling today? Because I love how you said that, Kyle, where it's like, every day is the same, but my emotions are different every single day. And just as a spouse who, if he says, this is a hard day, he was supposed to see his college friends maybe 2 weeks ago. He was supposed to fly to Texas. And that day he was supposed to leave, he was just really down. He was disappointed. And for him to say that to me, there's nothing I can do about it. But I want him to feel safe to say that to me. So I just want to listen to that. And I want to acknowledge that that's disappointing. That's hard. And there's nothing that I need to do to try to tell him, well, don't feel that way because blah, 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 blah. But just, I know it's frustrating. It's disappointing. But I think that takes skill, doesn't it? To really be able to really dig down and go, what is it that I really feel? What is it that's really bothering me? And it may be underneath why I'm getting irritated or I'm getting angry, when really it just may be, I feel weary. Like when I realized last week, oh my gosh, I'm an introvert and I have not been by myself in so long. That besides going on walks, and it just was hitting me. And to be able to acknowledge that to myself and to know this is who I am, this is how God has made me. It's okay for me to need an hour in a room with headphones in where I can't hear anyone. So I think just being able to know ourselves and acknowledge that to our spouse, and our spouse be able to receive that and to not try to talk us out of that feeling, especially right at the beginning. Because I think then after I feel heard and my emotion feels heard, I do want him to remind me of what's true. I do want truth and in my emotion, but I also want grace. I also want him to say, yeah, I get it that you would be tired of being around people all the time. Go take an hour. I've got this. And it's giving me permission to be myself, and he's acknowledging and affirming that that's okay. It's okay for me to be weary. It's okay for me. It's okay for him to feel disappointed.
And a question that came in was, under stress, that we can often respond differently. So I think maybe a husband and wife responding differently in different. What is some good advice on how to help others through stressful times? Like, so your spouse walking through that, is there?
Well, I think again, just we need, and I'm sure you already know your spouse. You're seeing it even more now, how they handle stress. We all handle stress differently. Some people just kind of shut down emotionally. Some people get very irritable. I don't know anyone like that. No, that's me.
I was like, no expressions.
When he gets stressed, he kind of gets very robotic and emotion shut down, so he can get a lot. He can still go and do a lot of hard things, perfect for his job. But so anyway, we handle stress like that. And so to know that about him, I think gives me more patience to know, like asking, basically, I take the stance of, how can I help you? How can I help ease whatever stress you have? Most of the time I can't really do anything, but I can listen and I can pray for him and I can encourage him and that kind of thing. So I think just knowing how your spouse, and that might be a great question to talk about with your spouse is, okay, it seems like you handle stress like this. Stress makes you do this. How can I help in that situation? How can I help you?
And I think, for someone who is, I'm pretty logical, and more on the rational perspective of things, and you're the, more emotional. A lot of times what I do is I just give space to vent, just like, all right, let's let it out, and not.
It's not like I'm like raging, but just.
Well, no, I'm certainly not.
I'm trying to figure out, by talking verbally, processing how I really feel. Right?
Yeah, it's almost like it takes a while to find like a handhold.
Yeah.
And then once she does, then we, but I think sometimes I circumvent the situation with the prototypical stuff of trying to offer her solutions too early, or I don't think
you don't do this, but like if people say, well, you shouldn't feel that way because that's not true. That doesn't help. But the just to validate, the truth helps
always
after,
helps.
But validating the emotion, like, oh yeah, like I can see why you feel that way. Don't forget this. This is what's true.
Yeah. So I think just knowing how you walk into that is always helpful for sure. So I'll ask you another question, maybe.
Okay.
And so y'all keep sending questions in. So this is about children and marriage. We're at home with young kids who require so much from us and are with us all the time. How do we have a good marriage with young kids always around us?
Yeah, this is a good one, isn't it? For you who have small children, this is, and even for us who have older kids, this is a challenging time because kids have just as much, if not more, needs than we do. And so what I would encourage you, especially with young children in the home, is to think about, what is the center of gravity in your home? Is it your marriage and the two of you, or are the children's needs taking precedence over that? Because that eventually, that's going to lead to some problems if the kids are the center of gravity, if it's their needs come first. And so some practical things that I would suggest to you is that you keep a good schedule and you keep good boundaries with the kids. So keep the schedule. It's easy to let the kids stay up later during these times. I mean, for us, we're experiencing that too, but there's a set time where they need to go upstairs and they need to be in the room reading or whatever, so that we can have some time, just the two of us. And so with smaller kids, that's a lot easier because their bedtimes are earlier. Together as a couple, talk about, what are you going to do? What time is that going to happen? And get the kids in bed so that you can have some time where you're not totally exhausted at the end of the night. But also, like, if husbands and wives are home together and kids have nap time, that's a good time. If work can be done at a different time so that you can have that, whatever it is, you just need to talk about it. But keeping those time boundaries, but also just making sure that there's time where you two are having conversation and time together. And the kids may have to do something that they don't necessarily want to do. They might have to have room time. You might need to go on a walk and the kids are in the stroller, and it's, that's the time for you to talk. And the kids need to learn that this is mom and dad time. We used to do, this takes a lot of training, but what a perfect time to do it. You're at home. But I remember he would come home from work and we would have like 10 minutes on the couch together. And the kids knew this is mom and dad's time and they need to go and do something else. And that took effort. But there's things like that you can incorporate where it's like, hey, we're going to have, maybe you put the kids down early and you have a meal together, a nice meal together, get takeout or whatever. But just talking together about how you're going to make the marriage the center of your home versus the kids the center of the home.
That's the deal. You see this all the time. You or not all the time, but sometimes you see that where it's like the kid at an early age, maybe they can even know this at like a year old, that the world revolves around them. And it's easy for us as parents to think, well, we're doing that now, but then later on we'll turn that off but I think it's just that whole, what is the golden goose and what's the egg, and we've told our kids like, hey, we were married before any of y'all came around. And then in a while, y'all are going to be gone and it's still going to be us. And so we're going to make that the priority. And so we've tried to do that in very intentional ways where even like in the morning, we've always in the morning, we've always been like, you are not free to get out of your bed or leave your room until we come and get you. And even now, in this.
Besides for the bathroom.
Yes. They can go to the bathroom. We allow them to use the restroom. But
not in their beds.
Yes. But even there's been this joke. They've walked down the stairs and they're like, hey, well.
Will we be received or booted?
And we're like, booted. Back up.
If we're having a conversation, we're not quite ready.
Booted. Yeah, they're booted. And so they know that they know that we are going to be the center of gravity for our family. They aren't. They're a part of it. We love them dearly. Like they're not outcasts either.
Right.
But man,
kids naturally take on as much. I mean, if you have children.
Yeah.
I don't even have to explain it.
So I think the ability to do that, and I think, not allowing, I think that what you said was really good about interruptions to be like, I think we've kind of always been like, do not, like we're talking, we're not going to, like, are you bleeding? Are you, is there an appendage that's fallen off? But I think having those kinds of things are important. There's got to be some carved out time for a marriage to thrive. It doesn't thrive in the scraps.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Okay, so I want to ask you, and I think we talked earlier about sexual intimacy and how intimacy leads to, like, relational intimacy leads to intimacy, and sometimes sexual intimacy leads to relational intimacy. But I would like to hear from you, what are some of the best practices that we can incorporate for our marriages during this time that would, and this, we're not just talking about it in terms of sexual intimacy, but these are the things we were referring to earlier.
Yeah. I think that I think there's many different things, and maybe you can think through questions and dialogue with your spouse as like what this could look like for you individually. But I think first off, I'd think through spiritual practices. I think the best way to love your neighbor is to love God.
Yes.
With all your heart. And so I think, are those things in place for you? Like a really good wife or a husband loves Jesus more. And so I think, are you cultivating those things, like a depth and a love for God, I think is, and so that's what we do even in this time. Like I've mentioned it at church, like we wake up, for me to be a functional human being, a Christian who loves Jesus, I have to beat my kids up from bed.
What?
I have to beat them out of bed.
Oh, I thought you meant like you have to beat them up.
No, I don't beat them up. But I have to get out of bed before they do. Does that make sense? Don't call.
Yes.
I have to beat them up. No, but I have to get out of bed before they do. I have to have that time. And then early on, I realized she does not want to talk in the morning. And so I talk to Jesus and spend time with him.
He'll talk to you.
And then I talk to her after she's
Wow.
ready. And so I think those are the practices. To forsake your own personal growth in the Lord is to suffer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, aren't you finding that every day your mind mentally and your emotions are all over the map? We've already kind of said that. I'm finding that time with the Lord is absolutely necessary for remembering just basic truths of who he is, where I am in this whole world and this story and whatever's playing out. And sometimes I wake up and my mind is just full of fear, anxiety, worry, apathy, frustration. And then I can go to the word and can be remembered. I mean, just simple truth of God is on his throne. Okay, then I can do this day. And so this is a great time. If you have not already started consistently spending time in the word, this is it. This is your time, and you need it. You need that truth.
But it's interesting to me that the first email I sent out when all of this was breaking loose and kind of talking through here's how we are as a church going to move forward in this, and was the discipleship one, was scripture before phone, that whole idea. And that was, I heard more positive encouragement from that expression of like, oh yeah, I am given to the panic of the news before, and I lose track of where I fit into the story.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's, we need to be like the men of Issachar and the women of Issachar that understand the days that we live in and know what's right, know what is the right thing to do, because we know that our God is in control.
And so when we have peace and security in the Lord, that translates into my relationship with my husband, that I'm not looking to him to rescue that. I keep using that term because that's sometimes what I think is, I wish he would rescue me from this situation. I wish he would do the right thing that would make me feel better. Well, he can't do that. God is the one who delivers me and sets my heart at peace. And so when I go to him, then I can go and relate to him in a right way, and a loving way, rather than a demanding or an angry way. So that's a practice, spiritual practice.
So spiritual practices, I think, are to make sure that are incorporated in a good marriage. I think it'd be good to talk through, like, what can you guys do specifically to encourage individual devotion to the Lord? And then I think you could also think through what you can do to incorporate that together as a couple, where it's like, if you got married as believers in Jesus Christ, you didn't want to just have baptize your marriage, but you wanted to hopefully have the Lord in the center of things. And so this is a good opportunity for you to reflect back to that, and then do some really honest evaluation, and then add in now what you can see, what opportunities are out there. Ask different people what they do, couples, what they do to make the Lord the center of their home. And so that's first, spiritual practices. I think one thing that I would by all means embrace the idea of are the grace practices. I would be liberal in demonstrating grace in to everyone, because having the idea that what you're feeling, they're feeling too. And so you want grace when you're struggling, when you're having a rough moment. And so they need it every bit as much as you do. And so I know that it's 1 Corinthians 13. We've heard this. You may have had this read at your wedding, but it's a good time to bring it back up. 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 7 teaches us, right, that love is patient and it's kind. So it's okay walking with someone who's struggling to get it and you responding in kindness to them. And so it's the idea that love is patient means that patience is needed. And so you responding with that. And then it doesn't envy or boast. And I think a lot of it is, are you taking a sense of like superiority at the other person and how they're struggling and being judgmental towards them? That I think that's something to think about and pray about. It talks about as well is that it's not rude and it doesn't insist its own way. Are you meeting the needs of other people by sacrificially serving them? It's not irritable or resentful. So this is a day of irritability for us. And so this love speaks against that we're not to be those things. We're not to be resentful. So it's a situation of like, whatever God has given you as a husband and wife, know that that's from him. And it's easy to resent those kinds of things. And then it bears and endures all things. It knows that the love is going to not always be easy for everyone at every point in time. And so it endures well, it suffers well, it long suffers with people, and then it believes and it hopes the best. So it has the best intentions of mind towards the other person. And so I would just encourage those, like 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7 is kind of like the grace practices to remind yourself of as you move forward.
That might be a good question for you to talk about with your spouse afterward tonight. Is just, where are you needing grace? Where do you feel like you're struggling and could really use their patience with you? And what would that look like specifically? I think that might be a helpful question.
So someone asks, it's a great time to learn about yourself and your spouse. How can you go about doing that?
Well, I think you can ask your spouse, what are you learning? What are you seeing? What's coming up in you right now? And what are you surprised about? We had this conversation yesterday, and I just said, there's just things that are becoming more clear for me in this time that I've tried to figure out for years. And God is showing me who I am and what I miss about normal life and what I don't miss about normal life. And he was able to say the same things. And so just asking one another that question, what are you learning about yourself as you go through this, I think is a really, really good question.
Yeah, so I think it would be good. And I think it'd be good to ask each other that as well, because I think that oftentimes your spouse can help give you
what do you see in me?
Yes.
In this time?
Yes. I think those are some good questions, like be able to self-diagnose, but also have the other person diagnose as well, to kind of have this group conversation happen.
Kind of like more along the lines of, where are you thriving in this? Like what do you love about this that maybe surprises you? Or what do you really miss? And what does that tell you about what you want to go back into when things return to normal?
I think it's part of the sanctification process too, of like, you could ask each other, like, how are you really enjoying this? Like, what are the aspects of this that you really are liking? And then what are the things that are really grating on you? Not from a marriage perspective, but just of like, what are the most difficult things, like what we've talked about and what I've even shared in the sermon, of like, those are the things that bugged me the most about all this. And why are those components there? And so but I think knowing that God wants to work a process of sanctification in your life and in your marriage together, I think is always having this, like, there's not one thing that gets wasted on the scrap heap of the raw materials of your life that God won't use to bring about his purposes. Yeah. Nothing gets wasted. These aren't wasted weeks, months, anything like that.
That's so true. Such an opportunity for us to grow spiritually, but also to grow in our relationships. And that brings us to another point that we were thinking about, and we wanted to talk about tonight with you, is how can we incorporate other people in our life during this time? Because our spouse cannot, I think that can feel it's hard when we're the only person available to them, right? And of course, this is my best friend and I'm going to tell him everything and I'm going to go to him with everything. But having other people, friendship and mentors in our lives, that's so important to us and to our growth and to who we are as people. And so I know like for me, you're finding it difficult to connect with people because we can't see people as much. So I wanted to talk some about that. How can we still continue to incorporate other people into our life and into what God is showing us about ourselves and how he's growing us? And so how would you want me?
Sure. You can start.
I would say one thing that's been really helpful for me in this is just to think about so I talked earlier about who's my neighbor. It's my husband and my children, for sure. Absolutely. That is like 99% of my time. But who are the people in my next concentric circle? Who are the people that that I have discipled, or who are the people that are my friends, that I really want to make sure that I'm checking in with them and connected with them. And how are we doing that? And I think even we have even started inviting people over to sit in the driveway with us from 6 feet away, and just be able to connect with people face to face, so that we can have that friendship as well. I think thriving friendship helps this thrive when there's more other people involved. But what would you say?
Yeah, I think that I think some of us, maybe we have to be careful about going too far with this idea of like quarantine or shelter at home means we don't engage with people, where I think that we have opportunities. To the level that other people are comfortable, I would engage with people. And then you certainly, I don't like Zoom at all. I would rather talk to someone on a phone. And so I've just called different people at different times and talked with them in that way. But like, who are the life-giving people in your world that you are investing in, and they're investing into you, that you could maintain conversation with, that I think would be by all means worthwhile to like think through what are the different concentric circles that you have, and develop that. Like, don't think that has to stop.
Mm-hmm. So we had a question come in. What can we who are young married with no kids do for our friends who have young kids in hectic homes? I think I've heard the term quarantine family, and meaning I would say we specifically have a single girl that we are continually bringing into the house. She's a part of our quarantine family. And so I think that maybe you could even think of one. Who are you close to? That one family that you're thinking about? You might know multiple, but could you talk to them about being quarantine family, where you can come in and take care of their kids? You can take their kids on a walk and give them some time alone. That is like gold right now for parents. And so, we may be saying something that you're uncomfortable with, just because of some people are handling the physical distancing a little differently. But how can you get creative in that way of just taking them a meal? I've seen people doing that. We've had so much fun taking things and dropping them off on porches with our kids for people, and just waving from the car. I mean, just anything like that. But I think if you have a family like that in your life, I would just ask them, what are they comfortable with? What would be helpful to them? That question is just in itself an act of love and a gift of love. So I would ask your friends.
I think you just have to ask, because I think everyone's has different ideas of what they're comfortable with and what they're not. And so I would find out whatever they are, whatever their comfort level is, and then go to that, where that is, like make that happen, which I think is awesome. I think that's a great heartbeat, is to do that for sure. So if you have your Bible, turn with me to 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 16. So Paul, this is the last letter that he writes before he's killed. Like, he's languishing in a prison. This is the story of his life. There's nothing else he's no more letters he's going to write. This is the end of his life on earth. And it says in verse 15, actually, you're aware, he's writing to Timothy in Ephesus, that you're aware that everyone in Asia, they've departed, they've left me, they've turned away from me. And then among them, he names 2 specific guys. And then he says, verse 16, may the Lord grant mercy to the household of Onesiphorus, for he often refreshed me and was not ashamed of my chains. But when he arrived in Rome, he searched for me earnestly, and he found me. May the Lord grant him to find mercy from the Lord on that day. And well all the service he rendered at Ephesus. And I just hope that in this time of distancing, when everyone else distanced themselves from Paul, that everyone was going to abandon him, that may we be Onesiphorus to one another, that we would be a refresher of people's souls, that it says that the end of verse 16, that for he often refreshed me. and that he wasn't ashamed of walking through people with their sufferings. He entered into their situation. When other people ran away, he ran too. And that he also took deliberate action, that he was intentional with what he did. So he was an intentional encourager and a life-giving person to him. And then, he was pray that the Lord would abound and give him mercy. And then he knows that he rendered service faithfully. So he would make it his practice to be a blessing, whether it was in Ephesus or in Rome, that he didn't just care about how he was doing, but he was intentional and proactive to be a blessing to other people. And so may we be people that are of the household of Onesiphorus as well, that we would be frequent refreshers of people.
Thanks so much for listening, friends. Please consider sharing this episode with others, or if you found this and previous episodes of By Faith helpful, leave a review on iTunes. Thanks so much in advance. Have a great week, and friends, keep walking forward by faith.